right, cool. All right, ladies and gentlemen, for anybody that's brave enough to go where few men have ever gone before, I invite you to join Ron Nielsen and I. This is our second video on his book, The History of Federal Lands in the United States. If you're interested in a copy of the book, which I hope that you are or will be, you can go to the history of federal lands in the United States.com. I will put a link down in the base of this video so that you don't have to try to type all of that in. You could just click on the link. The first video that we did was about an introduction to the book, and we hope that you will take some time to be able to listen to that interview to better understand the importance of the book, who Ron was, why he wrote it, and where we're going, and where we hope to continue to go, and where we end up. So, Ron, thanks for joining me today.
You're welcome. Thanks for
And
having me.
yeah, cool. All right. So as I read this book, so I like to tell people I read this book twice, man. And I wrote notes and chronology. I mean, I have all kinds of stuff. And I'd like to at least get that stuff typed so people will have that eventually for a Cliff Notes version or what have you. But I think part of where I wanted to start to be able to lay the groundwork where it needs to is to have you help us understand, not even about the book necessarily, but about American history around the time that all of this was happening. So when I read the book, there was some confusion. I had grown up thinking, well, it was our first form of government was the Articles of Confederation, or the Mayflower Compact, actually. And then it went into the Northwest Ordinance, and then it was the Articles of Confederation, and then it was the Constitution. And so, in everything that I read, it just seemed like that was just step by step by step. Would you mind elaborating the truth of the matter from the research that you've done and compiled in your book, please?
Yeah, so if you start, I think the general consensus is that the United States government began in 1776 with the Articles of Confederation. The Supreme Court counts it from 1777. That's when the offices were seated and the government began doing business, was in 1777. So that's how the Supreme Court that's how they began their exercise in the Downs versus Bidwell case. So that form of government was having some problems as it went along. You really see at the advent of the Treaty of Paris, 1783, where the United States government had acquired all of the Northwest Territory from England. It wasn't, you could look at it as acquired. I don't know. That's probably maybe not the right way to look at it. It was more along the lines of that property was in dispute the whole time. There were a whole bunch of states or colonies at the time, but they turned into states once they became Articles of Confederate States, right? So the Confederacy was an agreement between the states.
Hey,
That's what
wait a
the
sec. So,
Confederacy.
so when we're dealing, so what you're talking about is the Articles of Confederation at this time, right?
Yeah, I was talking
Okay.
about the Articles of
Okay.
Confederate government.
Okay. Okay. And so you had, so during I don't want to confuse people, but I'm confused. So we know what the common understanding with the Constitution is that we had 13 original colonies. They ended up getting together. They ended up formulating the Constitution. So you're saying around the time of the Articles of Confederation, the states were at what was the status there at that point?
Okay, so the Articles of Confederation turned the colonies into states. They weren't colonies anymore, they were states. That's what the Articles did. And it was a league of perpetual friendship, right? So the everybody says, well, the Confederate government. Well, the Confederacy was not a government. The Confederacy was the agreement. It was a league of friendship.
That's
The
something I've never heard
Northwest,
before.
sorry, yeah, well, it says it very clearly in the articles that it was a league of friendship, and it's really talked about very, very in a detailed manner in the Bidwell case.
Hmm.
So when they talk about in the Articles of Confederation that the Confederate government, well, the Confederacy was a league of perpetual friendship between the states
Hmm.
in common, right?
Hmm.
Then the way that you have to view the Articles of Confederation is the United States of America's first constitution,
Okay.
right?
Hmm.
So it's it was a Confederate agreement, but the government itself was not a confederacy. It was the people that were the states that were in agreement in a league of friendship. That was the Confederacy. Okay, so you have the Articles of Confederate Government.
Mm-hmm.
It's formed in 1777,
Right.
and in this perpetual league of friendship.
Mm-hmm.
Um, during this time, we go to war against England. We're in a revolutionary war against England while we have this Articles of Confederate Government. The Revolutionary War concludes, and we sign a treaty of peace in 1783.
Mm-hmm.
In that treaty of peace, England gave up its claim to the Northwest properties.
Okay.
England was not the only sovereign that had claim to those properties. Almost all of the states had some level of claim to all those Northwest properties. We're talking Ohio, Iowa, Minnesota, all the areas around the Great Lake. Uh, uh, so it was like 6 of them. I think there were 6 states around the Great Lakes
Right.
that ended up being carved out of there.
Well, it's
And
important to
so,
remember too for people that the Northwest Ordinance wasn't about the Northwest as we understand it today. So keep going.
right. So we acquire the specific right without England claiming those as a right. We get those, but the treaty mandates, the 1783 treaty mandates, Treaty of Paris mandates that those properties are turned over to the United States of America. The United States of America is the style of the Confederate government, meaning that's its name. The name of the United States government under the Articles of Confederation is called the United States of America.
Mm-hmm.
So let me just point this out real quick. The United States is a constitutional government, and the United States of America was the name of the Articles government. Okay, that's what that's all about.
My fingers obviously aren't going to write fast enough. So I'm gonna have to review this video myself. But I know that the content is good. Okay, so that's where we are. So the states had claimed we acquired the right. The 1783 Treaty of Paris mandated the property be turned over to the United States of America as the style of the Confederate government. And
Yeah,
go.
but the United States government, the United States of America government, the Confederate, the Confederate states and perpetual league of friendship, what they had to do is they had to settle all the claims of the 13 states against that property. They had to settle those before they could dispose of the property,
Mhm.
right? So they start deliberating this long deliberation and getting all of the states to extinguish their claims.
Mhm.
Once the states had extinguished their claims to that area, they started drafting land disposal programs. There was a series of them drafted. Thomas Jefferson drafted the first one. It didn't get added. It didn't get it passed in the Confederate Congress. And I'm
Mhm.
calling it a Confederate Congress. We probably shouldn't, but in the Articles of Congress, Thomas Jefferson's. I think the reason why his didn't get accepted is because his didn't take up the slavery proposal, so it
Mhm.
didn't get accepted. So Nathan Dane later wrote the one that did get accepted, and
Uh-huh.
it was finally passed. And I think Nathan Dane was on the first committee to organize this system, right? So the Northwest Ordinance was created and passed in 1787 is when they passed it. It was passed during the Articles of Confederate Government, right? The land. So this is the land disposal system, and I'm going to jump way ahead here, but I'm just going to say this: that land disposal system contained in the Northwest Ordinance remained intact until Congress passed the Federal Land Policy Management Act of 1976.
Wow.
You understand what I'm saying to you? They're the only legislation created for a land disposal system was drafted in 1787. And it
Wow.
wasn't altered until 1974, I think is when FLIPA was passed.
Wow. So the Northwest Ordinance, really, if we were going to break this down, the Articles of Confederation was arguably our first constitution, and the Northwest Ordinance wasn't a constitution at all. It was merely just the establishment of a land disposal program.
That's right.
Unbelievable. I have
But
never
what
heard
it
that in anything I've
did,
ever read.
but what it did, what the Northwest Ordinance did is it created a national government. And like I explained in the book, how the reason why I'm calling it a national government, two reasons. Number one, the government that was created was situated in Ohio under
St.
Arthur
Clair.
St. Clair.
Hmm.
He created Los Santosville in Cincinnati, and
Hmm.
that's where the seat of the territorial government resided. Okay,
Hmm.
his job was to help the United States carve out of the territories states according to the land disposal program. That was his job. So that means, picture this, you got a huge chunk of territory with no borders, no states, just a huge chunk of territory.
Hmm.
Congress deliberates, and they, on a piece of paper, they sketch out all these states, or one at a time, they sketch them out on a piece of paper. And they say, okay, we're going to create Iowa, Minnesota, all these states, Michigan. We're going to create these states, and we're going to need you, Arthur St. Clair, we're going to need you to, to use the United States military to protect
Hmm.
settlers going into there.
Hmm.
Because you had a whole bunch of Monte Rapids Indians. The English had holed up there working with the Indians to try to frustrate the government's land program.
Hmm.
It was dangerous.
So let's
It was
see.
dangerous.
Let's see if I can. Let's see if I'm not preemptively pulling you back. Because I think you get into Arthur St. Clair pretty well later with the commander in chief of the militia and so on and all of that. So I don't want to get too far into that. I'm still
Right.
trying to be able to flesh out where we are with that. So the Articles of Confederation, 1777, articulated pretty well in Downs and Bidwell, I guess you said. We had the Northwest
Yeah.
Ordinance, that was created in 1787 as a land disposal program. Okay. So then,
Yes.
this Northwest Ordinance is going on and was established during such time as the Articles of Confederation still existed.
Yeah.
Right? So then
Yep.
now my next question is, we've got the Articles of Confederation that's kind of blurred with, that's kind of with the end the Northwest Ordinance. So at what point then, it's almost hard not to mention Arthur St. Clair, because and the creation of a national government, because if he's the commander in chief, one could question, well, if the Constitution is in play at the same time the Northwest Ordinance is in play, isn't there now a conflict of interest? So, all right. So I'm glad
Okay. Now you're
okay.
getting now. Yeah. Now you're getting sort of to the crux of the matter. So
Right.
this is not talked about, Tom, in the historical record.
It's not. We're
And
gonna
I
make it
can
happen.
tell you right now, yeah, I can tell you right now that when the Confederate government suddenly realized that they had this commander in chief of the military that was in charge of the United States military,
Hmm.
and it was under a completely different territorial system that was separate from the Articles of Government.
Hmm.
And they thought they realized they were going through what they had done. They go, there's nothing in the Articles that constrain that government, that can constrain it. Nothing. If
Right.
we don't create a government that can hold on and constrain that government, what's to keep for Arthur St. Clair and this military system from going rogue?
Okay, so now we've established that, and I think my latency and my internet's bad, which is really bad because it's blurring out your face and not mine. Sorry. Anyway, so the land disposal program goes on and it develops, and of course you get onto that later in the book, but we're still establishing a timeline here. So, what about the Constitution? Are we to say that since the Northwest Ordinance overlapped the Articles of Confederation, that the Constitution overlays the Northwest Ordinance?
Yeah, so here's what happened. So about 5 months, roughly 5 months after they passed the Northwest Ordinance, they began realizing they might have made an error on
Hmm.
a lot of different fronts. And
Hmm.
so they go, okay, that this system that we have now will not constrain this government. Plus, there's a whole bunch of other things that it was incapable of doing. And I write this in the book. This is the remainder of these things are very well fleshed out in historical record. All of the things that article's government couldn't get done, and
Hmm.
it didn't have a very strong commercial system, right?
Right.
And the states had all the power. There was no centralized power as of
Hmm.
yet.
Hmm.
Okay, so 5 months, roughly about 5 months from the time that Northwest Ordinance passed and began going into operation, they quickly met at the tavern, Man's Tavern in Philadelphia, and they go, okay, we've been sent here to deliberate to figure out whether or not we can shore up the articles to fix these problems, and rapidly figured out this just we can't do it. We can't do it. So they all report back to their states and go, look, we got to call a new convention and we got to draft something new, and we better do it fast because we've given assets, military might, a designated position of commander in chief that they didn't even have yet. Right, the Constitution had not been drafted, so they're like, okay, we better make a chain of command that this military government, territorial military government that operates on rules and regulations,
Hmm.
reports back to somebody in government.
Hmm.
And it better be legislation that shows that how that happens. And we better embed this thing in the Constitution.
Okay, so when they were calling for, when they recognized that the Articles of Confederation, I'm sure this is probably what you mean, or what history means, is that they said that the Articles of Confederation was deficient for the exigencies of whatever. We all know it had to do with interstate commerce, or so we were told. We all knew that the Constitution was going to be needed for national security or whatever it was. But the convention you're speaking of, was that the was that the convention to um to sort of shore up the Articles of Confederation that ended up giving us the new Constitution?
Yes.
Okay, so that actually brings up something really, really interesting, because if you read Article 13 of the Articles of Confederation, you found out that the delegates that actually went there, I'm almost wondering now, if I look at this, if they actually misled the public by saying that they needed to go in and fix the Articles of Confederation and ended up giving us a new constitution when they already knew they were going to do it.
uh so there is nothing in the record that I can find that shows that the people that met at Man's Tavern realized that they had to create a new constitution. There's nothing
Okay.
that suggests that. Everything that I see in the historical record suggests that they really thought that they could revise the articles
Okay.
and make them work.
Okay. And they probably realized in the convention they probably couldn't, or what have you. So, okay, so
Convention,
go ahead.
they to convention and they started talking about trying to revise articles, and they realized that you couldn't. It was like mixing oil and water to some degree, simply because in order for the United States government to constrain this territorial government, it was going to have to give the United States government territorial jurisdiction, and
Okay.
the articles government didn't have it, right?
Hmm.
So they're like, okay, we just the whole foundation and crafting the government needs complete revision. It's the same
Hmm.
thing that's going to happen if
Hmm.
we call a convention of states now.
Hmm. Right.
Same thing.
Okay, so we're at the when you were talking about they're trying to revise the articles or whatever, they might have thought we needed a new convention. So at what point during the Northwest Ordinance did the Constitution um come into play, for lack
So
of a better
so
phrase?
the articles was passed, or I'm sorry, the Northwest Ordinance was passed by the Articles government in 1787. The Constitution started being deliberated 5 months later. Okay, they thought that what they were doing is revising the articles, but they just entirely rewrote a new form of government, right?
Hmm.
So that took a process. It took roughly a matter of 5 or 6 months or something like that. Probably less time than that. I don't know exactly. I don't remember the exact time frame that it took to draft the Constitution. But then they had to send it out to the states. They had to try to get it ratified. And then they found out from the states, when the states reported back, that they couldn't get it ratified because there was nothing in the Constitution that offset these general powers that were given to the government. So, and these general powers were crazy. They still are crazy. Because there's no limitation on the necessary and proper power, the commercial power, really. There's just no limitations on how these things, the delegation of federal authority, the territorial jurisdiction of the government. I mean, there's a lot of the Constitution is a powerful document, and it would be overbearing if private rights were not added to the Constitution. It would have been overbearing right out of the gate. So, okay, so you had roughly, a year in there where the Constitution was being drafted, and then it went out, and then all this deliberation. So that means you had, by the time the Constitution was ratified in 1789, I believe was the last state to ratify, and they seated the constitutional government in 1789. You had a 2-year time frame where the articles, or where the Northwest Ordinance territorial national government was in operation for 2 years.
After that,
before the Constitution. Before the Constitution.
Okay, so
look at the dates.
So say that again. So
1787.
Right.
The Northwest Ordinance goes into operation. It is in operation. It's functional. 1789, the constitutional government goes into operation.
Okay, and while the Northwest Ordinance is still in operation.
Yes. Yes, it's been in operation for 2 years.
Okay,
now.
so this is a dumb question, but maybe for people that are just learning this. So when the new Constitution took over the Articles of Confederation, was there any sort of documentation that actually stopped one and began the other? Or was it just basically understood?
There was no rescinding.
Enabling Act, something like that.
Well, so anytime the government passes legislation to authorize an activity that it does, that's enabling legislation.
Okay, and so that would be like an addendum to whatever was written before and supersedes it, right?
Right.
Okay,
so
good.
Here's how we look at it. So you got the Articles of Government that's in operation. It bursts the Northwest Ordinance. Then the next act of that government downstream 2 years later is to put a new form of government into operation. So you have the first Constitution, and then you have the second Constitution. Now they're named different things, but when you look at the preamble to the United States Constitution, it says that this new one was done for this one.
Okay. Wow. So are we also to say then, if the Constitution of 1789 superseded or whatever, replaced the 1777 articles, that when the new Constitution was created, it stopped the Northwest Ordinance? It didn't, did it?
No.
So all this time, the Northwest Ordinance is still. So this is why, and I don't want to send you off on a tangent, but this is why we've got multiple national governments that you were talking about that nobody else knows. So okay, so now we've kind of laid the groundwork in kind of a roundabout way on what exactly was going on, what kind of form of government we had in the beginning, what was going on between that form of government, our first Constitution and our second Constitution. We've helped expose the fact that the Northwest Ordinance was not a constitution at all. It was just really a land disposal program. The Constitution actually partially created, as I understand, to be able to try to fix the errors or the OMGs of the decisions that they inadvertently made or whatever. So that kind of clarity is hugely important. And if nobody else is benefiting from it, I'm loving it. So it's great. It's so great to be in this position. So now that we've got the constitutional government, is there any need to go on a little bit further before we discuss whatever it is next that we're going to do?
No, I think that pretty much gives you the fundamental foundational aspect of why the Northwest Ordinance. So people can't understand why I keep talking about it. And because they don't understand that the Northwest Ordinance was well, let's talk about this now. everybody says, well, the Northwest Ordinance wasn't added to the Constitution. I would say, well, yes, it was.
Hmm.
It was added into the Constitution, Article 4, Section 3, Clause 2. Because so there was no provision in the Articles of Confederation for a
Hmm.
land disposal system or a state creation program.
Right.
None.
Right.
So when they created the new Constitution, they already had that system operational. It was already moving.
Okay.
Arthur St. Clair was there. He established Los Santosville. He was operating. Okay, they were actively running the program. So when
Right.
they sat to deliberate the Constitution, and you can see this clearly in the Federalist Papers. Now
Mm-hmm.
they're a little vague in the Federalist Papers about the land program, but it's in there. They talk about it.
Okay. That's
So
good. Article
it
4, Section 3, Clause 2.
that's right.
Okay.
That's right. And
That's important for everybody to look at.
that is the intent of the Articles government as it switched over to the Constitution. That is the intent of the land program.
Okay.
There's an
Okay.
additional intention there, and it's found in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17.
Hmm.
And it's the territorial jurisdiction given to the seat of government in Washington, what later became Washington, D.C.
Right. And I think at this point, it's probably good to rehash some of um, the, the fallacies or inconsistencies that I had in my constitutional learning. So, I was told if you read 9 books on a topic, you're an expert. So I guess that makes me a constitution expert. I'll never claim to be an expert because never trust your freedom to get what you get. Um, but the idea that I think I was listening to a presentation on the Convention of States with Scott Bradley yesterday or the other day, and he said that Madison had made these quotes in the Federalist Papers or whatever that the government was limited to few and defined powers. That's a common phrase that I've heard. I think the I think many of us have heard it before. I think we've referred to it before, but you were the first one that really just kind of stopped me in my tracks and said, name one limitation that that the Constitution has. And I think that somebody might say, well, it's only the things that are outlined in, for Congress in Article 1, Section 8. Well, that is true, right? So
That is true.
there is some sort of bracket. I would say I would call it loose because if we needed to create rules, under the necessary and proper clause, to be able to maintain that same purpose, which we clearly don't. It's important to be able to recognize, yeah, I mean, there was some sort of basic limitation, but these few and defined powers were not necessarily defined in the way that most of us think they are.
Right.
And so I think there might have been either a historical transition or a misunderstanding, difference in words, whatever there is. The point is that it's a point that's worthy mentioning today that, I would encourage anybody to be able to look at the Constitution and look at what the limitations really are and ask yourself if you're going to end up creating a nation and you're going to begin with 13 colonies and the 13 colonies are going to, they're going to give up some of their autonomy or their sovereignty to create a federal government for a certain particular thing. Do you suppose that the creation of that entity isn't going to be able to have some rules that further govern those items that had been given to them? And so this really makes the point, and it's a very important point, which is why I brought it up. So that was a really good one for you to tell me. And I realized after reading your book, it shattered, it confirmed a lot of things, but it probably shattered more than it confirmed. But ultimately, in the end, it helped solidify a greater understanding than I ever thought that I would have about the Constitution and this governmental history to this point. So I can thank you a lot for that. Um,
You're welcome.
so uh, so you begin. So I wanted to be able to start doing these videos to be able to help people as they started reading the book. And so I had heavily notated the book. So I thought I would sort of tap on some of the things by page, and you can briefly kind of discuss those. I have certain. I have certain questions, but I'm not exactly sure what page that I put them in. Um, um, so I'm going to begin on where you had chapter one, um, which was which was page 7. You were talking about the uh the United States sent John Jay, Ben Franklin, and John Adams and Henry Lawrence to negotiate the terms of ending the Revolutionary War with Britain, which you mentioned. The main objectives for the two Americans were independence from Britain and land.
Yeah.
See, so
Wow.
most of us think, oh, we just shook off the chains of tyranny from Great Britain, by divine call or whatever it is. But nobody ever talks about land. So
Yeah.
I think it's fair to say at this point that no matter what you read, always consider it from the perspective of land, right, Ron?
Yes. Everything. So that is the most important aspect of the United States. The most important aspect, as far as I can ascertain, of the United States and its creation and its history is the acquisition and the disposition of land.
And
It
so
drives the entire, like our whole history as a nation is driven by those two components.
right. And so you go on to talk about the focus on going forward. So you're laying out the beginning and purpose of the book is going to be it'll be the lands in the United States acquired, which will make up the current continental United States. Um, since the lands have been added to the nation's piecemeal. So we went over that pretty briefly, and then you go into the acquisition of the land, and what's been done with the land, which is what we're trying to figure out. Why much of the why much of the remains are in federal possession, and what the policies are that affect those.
Yeah.
Um, and trying to be able to go through in your research with all of the missing context that you've really had to try to do to be able to connect the dots. Is that right?
Yeah, the difficulty was that there's not a lot of fare on this subject that is written out in a bibliographical format. I had to piece it together through the hardcore documentation that exists, through Supreme Court precedent, through whatever I could get on the Northwest Ordinance from the historical record on the Northwest Ordinance, state archives, military reports. Man, this has never been in the format that I put it in. It's never been consolidated before like this.
Wow. And it's true. And I'm excited. It really couldn't come at a better time. I keep wanting to be able to talk about Texas and I want to talk about the Supreme Court and I wanted to be able to talk about all this stuff. And so if you guys are listening and and you start getting what's happening or you already do, we're really trying to talk about how to be able to do those updated videos as they happen so that as people are learning about the book and land acquisition and the disposal programs and national governments and how things were going and all of these different things that all of these other components that we're doing with current events are going to help um, substantiate the point of the book. And it's funny because the timing of this book is absolutely incredible with all the stuff that we're seeing in the news, isn't it?
I'm
So
telling you, the whole thing going on in Texas, Dar Moon, if you guys don't know Dar Moon, Dar and Dorothy, they're a married couple. And Dorothy runs the state GOP. She's the chair for the state in the state GOP. And he's got a website, Idaho on Fire, and he posted this article from Armstrong Economics. And in the article, they were pointing out that part of the issue with the Texas thing with the federal government is the territorial jurisdiction of the federal government.
mhm.
And this is nobody talks about that. I'm the only one I know of talking about the territorial jurisdiction of the federal government, and it's becoming a very it's going to become it's unavoidable that we're going to have to talk about it. It's unavoidable
Mhm.
because there's a lot of the United States that's still under this jurisdiction, and if we don't talk about it, we are not going to be able to fix some of these very large problems.
Did you see the comment that we had on our first video? One of them,
No,
we didn't have very many. I think we had one, but one of them was said, it's basically said, and I could be messing it up or whatever, but he said, are you saying that the people don't have rights on federal land? And I, and so as much as I hesitated to be able to take on that that thing, I'm like, well, it's definitely something that's been in question on whether private rights are actually extended to, to the citizens on federal land.
Here's how I'll say that. Here's how I'll answer that question. I'm going to answer it using the same verbiage that the Supreme Court used when it talked about this in a decision. There is no guarantee
Mm,
of private
that's right.
rights.
You did write that in there.
That's the word choice that they use. There's no guarantee of private rights.
Well, if we yeah, there's no understanding of rights now, so things really haven't changed that much.
Yeah, right.
So as we move on, we have, you did a really great job in the first part of the video, in the next part of what we were talking about, and I think we actually simplified it quite a bit according to the way it was in the book, relating to the not necessarily the timeline of the governments and what was going on and how they overlapped or didn't. But when you were talking about the treaties, um, the establishment of the Northwest Territory, the lands that were supposed to be given to the United States, um, the Articles of Confederation, which is what did you say? That was the style of the Confederacy is the United States of America.
Yeah, that's the
Um,
name of the first government. The name of the second government is the United States.
right. And then you mentioned something. There is in Downs and Bidwell, there's a quote. I think it's on page 8. It says the federal government was created in 1777 by the Union of 13 colonies of Great Britain in certain articles of the Confederation and Perpetual Union. The first time of which declared that the style of the Confederacy shall be the United States of America. Each member of the Confederacy was denominated a state. And that's really fascinating because this is like the Supreme Court case that never existed, and that's kind of that's what you said, right?
Yeah,
That
because it's the Supreme Court case that the federal government wish doesn't
didn't
exist.
exist, right? So, and it was kind of funny,
Yeah,
and
they wish.
I'm probably jumping the gun a little bit, but it's interesting that you have this question and you bring it up, I think, to the degree that it needs to be brought up. Some people believe that, we're a democracy, and some people believe that we're a constitutional republic or, a representative democracy or whatever it is. You also had arguments on by maybe judges or, whatever on whether we were actually, or presidents in this case, whether we were a union or whether we were a confederacy. And I love when you get
Yeah,
down into history talking about what was going on with with the war between the states, where where you had the Union Army and then you had versus the Confederate Army and all that kind of stuff. So that's a really interesting thing. But I did see the mention of the Union there. And if you guys are curious about that, or if you're not, I hope to pique your interest now, is that once you get through this book, you're going to clearly understand what was actually going on, not only between the North and the South, and what was going on with slavery, but you'll understand why the words like Union and Confederacy were used, right, Ron?
that's right. Yeah, there was a different intention in the use of the words, right? So again, going back to what I said earlier, the use of the term Confederacy back when they created it was a league of perpetual friendship between the states, and then that league of perpetual friendship they called a perpetual union also, right? So
Hmm.
the first use of the term union was in context with the Confederacy. Later on, as a division began separating the Federalists from the Anti-Federalists after the Constitution, during the Constitution's drafting, and then after,
So it sounds like
as the
it was more of a grammatical understanding, if I remember right. Right? You had mentioned something whether it was a noun or an adjective or or whatever, but
yeah,
it was the union wasn't meant to be a thing.
that's right.
It was it was barely it was maybe to define a relationship. I can't remember your exact
A
words.
descriptor. It was
Yep.
it was used as a descriptor on how the states were supposed to be unified with one another under the Confederacy. But our our historical record tells us no, you have the Union and then you have the Confederacy. It's
Hmm.
like Okay,
No.
yes, they became that,
Hmm.
but we have to understand something. As the anti-federalists and federalists began splitting, they began having a different idea about how to run the government. There was the original idea, which was a League of Perpetual Friendship under the Confederate model.
Hmm.
And then the Federalists began separating themselves, going, no, we want more of a unified model where the central government is dominant.
Hmm.
So they took the term the Union out of that and they say, well, we're gonna promulgate the term union.
Hmm. And now, of course,
And then
Dom.
when we and then so the original, so this is important. The original land program was admission into the Confederacy. And you can see this in the Northwest Ordinance in the states that were being created in Iowa and all these states. You look at their admission acts, and there's language in there showing that they were being admitted into the Confederacy.
Hmm.
But when everything dissolved and fell apart, when you get to the Civil War, they're going, no, we're going to do this as admission into the Union
Right.
because
So,
they dissolved the Confederacy.
so to clarify this again, and I think it's really important to bring up, um, is that the means that the agreement between the states is called several things. Among them is the Confederacy in the United States of America. This is just a means that the body of entities in the agreement constitutes a confederacy or a what relationship. Would that be fair to say, Ron?
Yeah, or just we can use the term League of Friendship
Right. Okay, that
between
works.
between the parties.
Okay. The title of the bodies in agreement is called the United States of America, with the United States being the constitutional agreement. I think people are going to really, really still, after what we've explained, still have some trouble with that. So we might have to go
Of
into a
course,
deeper explanation on that. So I had written down, I'd written down that the Confederacy is a plurality of states, which is the USA. The
a
drafting,
plurality of states. Yeah.
yeah, the drafting agreement is the Articles of Confederation, United States Constitution, and the constitutional agreement is the United States. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay. So,
And here's what helps us get there, Tom. What helps us get there is you just read the preamble to the Articles of Confederation. It
okay.
tells you right away that the style of this government will be the United States of America. Style of this Confederacy will be the United States of America. That literally means that the title of the Confederate government
Hmm.
is the United States of America. So now we're dealing with titles. We're
So,
naming things now. We're calling them things.
okay. So now we want to make sure that I don't ever want to be able to try to help educate people on something without giving them something to do. So even though we could have probably done that at the end, I think it's pretty fair to say that, if you're not interested in buying Ron's book yet, that is the history of I'm going to put the link in the video. the, the history of
Okay.
federal lands in the United States.com. Um, then I would strongly encourage you to be able to read the Articles of Confederation, read the preamble, read the articles in there. Take your time understanding that, recognize the importance of words. And even if you're grammatically challenged like I am, something should jump out at you. And if you read it a couple of times, it'll be probably like reading scripture or anything else worthwhile, is that, the more you read it, the more it's going to speak to you. And then you'll start being able to put things together, I think, the more that you do. So that's an action item for people to do then, and hopefully at the end of videos, we can ask people to be able to do other types of action items, or which might even be asking questions and things of that nature. So we talked about the need for the process for land acquisitions. You talked about you mentioned something about the Continental Congress had passed a resolution called the Resolution on Public Lands in which the states tentatively have agreed, this is what I wanted to get to, tentatively agreed to cede their claims to the United States of America if the war with England were to resolve in their favor. So what I'm understanding this means is after these states were created, or territories, I got really confused with the word states and territories. So there's probably some sort of logical progression, and I'm hoping that you'll clarify that. But I found this really interesting because it sounds to me like this resolution on public lands basically gave it was a tentative agreement to cede their claims to the United States for people that already owned, not people, states or territories that already owned land.
You remember earlier in our conversation, I told you that uh, in the Treaty of 1783, the United States of America had acquired all the land free and clear. England was no longer going to take a position of a claim on the Northwest properties. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
but then I also explained that all 13 states also had claims to that property.
Right.
That's what that's talking about.
Okay. All right, cool. That's a really huge, important piece to the puzzle. So I'm glad I actually remembered to mention that.
Yeah, yeah.
And that might even need further explanation too. Anyway, so because I was looking at that and I thought, oh my God, and it sounds just like the federal government, right? You're gonna, they give you the privilege of taking something, or you have the right to be able to take something, and then they're like, hey, wait a minute, we got a great idea, man.
Say, pull
For
it back.
today only, if you give us back the land, we'll give it back to you later.
What a bargain
And
for me.
oh my gosh. I mean, that's where my mind, see, that's where my mindset is. I'm like, oh yeah,
I know, right?
I'm seeing shenanigans all over the place on this.
Well, the United States government actually used to work in a more noble, forthright fashion when it was first created for a long time, up
Yeah.
until, roughly about the time you see a big change in the way that they're going to operate about the time we acquired the Louisiana properties. From then on, it was a downhill slide.
What an interesting history that is. I loved it. I mean, I was telling everybody at the gym and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, did you know this about the Louisiana Purchase?" I remember being taught that in history class, and I thought, oh, this is so boring. Who even cares? And today I'm like, oh, are you kidding me? This is awesome. So anyway, when we get to that, that'll be really fun. So
Oh
you
yeah.
move on to talk about the creation of territories. So the Northwest territories began to take shape. So maybe before we go into anything any further, and at this point we're at 4:30 to, so we're about 45 minutes, so we should probably wrap this up. So
Okay.
let's make our final plug here, and we'll just end it here. Um, helping me understand, you use the word territories a lot, territorial governments, national governments, whatever. Let's see if we can sort of have you break down for us, um, if there's a logical progression, if there's a separation, if there, what these two, the word territories mean, and what the word states mean. Because as far as I know, and I don't want to overcomplicate things, but I know that there was a provision about having 5,000 males that had certain amount of property, and so on and so forth. And I don't want to get you all off on the wrong tangent, but so the question really is what is the difference between, so how does everything begin? So land is there, it's cut out. It really is just land, right? Part of the land disposal program. They didn't name it, they didn't do it. They probably had parcel 4277 or whatever it is. So what happened after that? That land was under the ownership of the, whatever you want to call it, United States government, or you or the, or in control. It was under the jurisdiction of the federal government at the time, right? Under the
Yeah. So the best way to look at this is this. All right. So the Articles of Confederate Government and the Constitutional Government begins with the 13 states.
Mhm.
Begins with 13 states.
Okay.
Any property additional to the 13 states began as territorial.
Because it wasn't a state. That
Right. It
began as
wasn't
territorial.
included in the. It was not included in the Confederate Agreement. It was not included in the Constitutional Agreement.
Okay. So now what we have is we've got several questions on territories now. So we have a territorial government called the Northwest Ordinance. We've got the, whatever the more loosely defined one, the Southwest Ordinance, that you don't really go into too much. Um, but there's a difference between territories small and territorial governments big, right? So the territorial governments would be the governments over those specific undefined territories, right? Is that right?
Yeah,
Did I
so
say that
the
right?
whole idea, and it took me a little while to work this out, and I'm glad that you gave me the opportunity to explain this. So imagine a pie. So you got 13 colonies over here that become states. They're not included in this pie. The remainder of the United States that's not included, that's
Hmm.
not this over here, the 13 states, the
Hmm.
remainder of the United States is this big pie. And this big pie has nothing to do with these states, nothing whatsoever. These are not a part of that.
So
Now
it's all good.
we've got to try to make this a part of that. And there was no procedure prior to the land program for doing that. They had to create it.
Mm,
Okay.
okay.
So when they sat down and go, well, how do we make all of this be at the same status as this?
Hmm.
How do we do that? How do we make it that? And they're like, well, here's the issue. And what I can't tell you what the issues are because there are too many. The issues are probably the best thing to do is ease into the issues if we even want to do that because there's a lot of issues. You just don't make these this.
Right.
It doesn't
So
happen.
so the
You've got
ultimate
there's a lot of work here.
so the ultimate goal then is to be able to eliminate this and put everything here. So you had the 13
Yeah.
pieces of this pie. They're like, let's say, I don't know, sovereigns is probably the wrong word, but they're just different from the undefined, because those are declared states, right? So those are
Yep.
declared
Yep.
states. The pie is declared territorial. Is that a good
Territorial.
is that a fair way to
That
say
is
that?
exactly right.
Okay.
That
So
is
the
exactly right.
13 colonies were all state, each one of them were states, and then the pie is the territorial government. The duty through
Yep.
the land disposal program is to be able to divide that pie to where each piece that was cut out of that pie was moved over here and transferred out of the territorial jurisdiction into becoming their own state. Is that also true to
That's
say?
right. Yeah,
Oh,
that was the
this is
intent
good.
of the land program.
Okay, because I looked at that pie thing, I'm like, I have no idea what this means. But you know
Well,
what?
so
This.
you got your pie, and then so you carve a piece out. That's
Mhm.
your state. You carve it
Right.
out. You give it boundaries,
Hmm.
and then when you admit it into the union, it gets removed from the pie. Then you carve out another one. It's got definitive boundaries,
Hmm.
and then when it gets removed from being admitted into the union, it gets removed. So you're just removing pie, removing pie.
That's really good. So we have the so in the pie, were there smaller, this is the land disposal program, right?
Yes,
Okay, so if this is the land disposal program, they looked at land as the entirety, the territory as one chunk, right? And
it
their
was
job
mandated. It was mandated in the Northwest Ordinance that all unorganized territory would be one district.
and unorganized would mean anything that's not, no, it wouldn't because the states are different.
So
So now
you
we have to
got you got
explain the difference between organized territories and unorganized. And the
easy to
unorganized
do.
territory is part of the pie, right?
Easy to do. So you got your pie and it doesn't have any slices in it. That's unorganized territory.
Okay.
As soon as you make a slice and you
Mhm.
organize that territory,
Mhm.
it's organized.
So once it becomes organized, it's an organized territory, but it's not quite yet a state because it
Well,
still
as
had to
soon as it
fall.
becomes yeah, as soon as it becomes organized, it's no longer part of the one district.
That's one district. That's right. So what is it at that point?
It's it's an organized territory. So now
Okay.
so think about it this way. You
But
got
not
your
quite a
pie,
state.
you
Okay.
got your pie, you
Mhm.
got your plate that the pie is going to go on, and then that pie and that plate is going to be handed to somebody to eat. So the 13 states are the guy that's eating the pie.
Right.
The plate that the pie is going to go on is the organized territory.
Okay.
It's not a part of this, but it's been removed.
That's great. That's a perfect, yeah, that's great. Okay, that's good because that was really, really confusing for me. And so, and I don't know, it's a little bit down later in the book, but I think as we finish up, um, there were when when that when that organized territory was sitting on that plate before it was given to somebody to eat, let's say, um,
Yeah.
the th- th- that the person that's going to be eating that the pie off the plate, it is that actually a state once that pie on that plate has been delivered to the guy that's eating it?
Yeah. So the whole idea of that
Sorry.
analogy, right? The whole idea is that once the guy on the plate is eating the pie, he's now part of that.
Right.
Whoever
So
that guy belongs to, the guy and the pie, they're all one now.
okay, so
They're
he's an
experiencing oneness.
okay, right, okay. So he's an individual state at that time.
Right.
Because there is a provision or several provisions before they become states where they had right where they had to have, like, if I remember right, if it wasn't a different book. I read so much. Was it 5,000 people or am I completely off topic?
5,000 free inhabitant males.
That owned prop that were property owners.
Yep. They had to have a freehold estate.
Right. Okay. Okay. And they had to be a certain age, maybe?
Yep.
Not okay.
Yeah. I can't
Yeah.
remember what the age is, but yeah, they
Yeah.
had to. So there were some qualifications. And again, we're talking about the creation of the Western United States under
Right.
the Northwest Ordinance, which is a
Right.
land program. And
Right.
all of those provisions in the Northwest Ordinance had to be abided by across the entire pie.
Right. And then once they actually acquired the all of the necessities, then they would apply to the federal government for statehood.
Yep.
Okay. I think that's a great place to stop, don't you?
Yeah, it is.
All right, guys. Well, if I botch this, Ron, do you know your website yet? Sorry to put you on the
Yeah,
spot.
federal lands.
The history of
So
federal lands in the United
history of federal
States.com.
lands. Yeah.
The yeah, I'm gonna make
I've
sure I
been
get
there a
some of that.
couple of times. You know, Kaylee set it up for me. God bless her. And I've been there a couple of times. I haven't. I need to write it down some more so I have access to it.
Well,
You know,
thank you for Kaylee. I'll put it in the bottom. Hopefully hopefully we'll be able to create a page where these videos will be embedded on your website to be able to add a little more content, which would be really fun. Um, and I guess I just wanted to thank you for joining me. And I think the next month or two is going to be is going to be a battle for us to be able to try to carve out some of this stuff to get some content out for everybody, right?
yeah, you know, just in the stuff that we've talked about, there's a lot of side issues, you know, that are relative to now because, you know, one thing that we haven't quite addressed, but we're going to need to is okay, what was the power that the United States government used to do all of
Hmm.
this? Because
No, yeah.
that's relevant now, but we'll get into that later.
Yeah, so hopefully we'll continue on with the books, and hopefully we'll have intermittent videos that you know breaking news, where we can be talking about some of the relevant news and talk about how they are connected to the topic that we're talking about that is so increasingly unbelievably relevant. It's unbelievable. Well, Ron, thank you for helping me with for our second video. If you guys like the video, share the video. You know what you know the thing. That was what Biden said. I thought it was funny, but
You
anyway,
know the thing, the
you
thing,
know the thing.
yeah.
And so we look forward to you guys. If you have any questions, put those in the comments section, or reach out to us individually. We'll have some contact information at the base in the comment section of the video as well. So until next time, we'll see you guys later. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
I gotta see how to